My name is Lena Augustinson.
And I'm Naomi Clifford, and we'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Door History Podcast.
The door. The
door.
door.
The
The
door.
door.
The
The
door.
door.
The door.
The door.
The door.
The door.
Hello, Naomi.
Hello, Lena.
I'm very excited about this conversation because she seems like an extraordinary woman.
Louise Michel.
Indeed. She was born 1830, is that right?
That is right, yes, in a little tiny hamlet called Roncourt-la-Côte, which it is absolutely minute, deep in the countryside.
Yeah. But yet she has a Lambeth connection.
She does indeed. She does.
How does that journey begin, even from this little place in France to Lambeth?
Well, yes, she certainly got about, Louise Michel, all ends of the earth. But at one point in her life, she visited Lambeth Workhouse, which we'll come back and talk about in a bit. And she also lived in Lambeth and in Southwark. She lived in various addresses in South London towards the end of her life, and she loved London.
So tell me, she was born in this little place, and was she from a well-to-do family, or?
No. She was, in a way. Yes, she was. Her mother was a maidservant, and we think, well, historians think that she probably was working in the big house in the village, so working for the local gentry, and she became pregnant, probably by the son of the family. And then Louise was born, and Louise was her only child. Her mother never married anyone else. But her father's family was said to have paid for her education and more or less brought her up. So she was from very humble beginnings, but she also had the opportunity for education.
So a little bit unusual for a girl child at that point in time, I guess.
Certainly,
from that.
Yeah. A woman whose mother was a maidservant would not generally be educated beyond the most basic level. Girls are not regarded as suitable material for education.
Yeah, and I guess that made her being able to work, maybe.
Yes, I mean, when she was a young woman, she's worked as a teacher fairly locally to where she was born. And she got the sack a few times for being quite radical. So she was thinking about radical ideas from really quite an early age. It was mostly.
What did you do? Do we know what she did?
Well, one of the things she did is she wrote a children's story set in Roman times, and this was seen as a comment on the emperor, Napoleon III. Yeah. And she taught the children to sing the Marseillaise, which was seen as a very revolutionary, incendiary thing. And and really at this time, education was run by the church. So if the church didn't approve of you, then you were out. So she was sacked, and she tried various sort of private tuition routes, but eventually she went to Paris, to Montmartre.
Just put it in context for me, this period in France then. So you had the emperor.
Yes.
Napoleon, who was quite like a dictator.
Well, I see him as a kind of Trumpian figure in that he was very self-important and he had an inflated idea of his talents.
Yeah.
And he was he established himself as emperor in 1852 in a very unpleasant way. It was quite a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be more of an authoritarian figure, even though he was emperor. So he was essentially a dictator, and he was very much supported by the right, of course, the conservative right.
But Paris was different in that you had more sort of people who were more free thinking, or
yeah, there was much more of a mix there. I think, particularly Louise Michel working in Montmartre would come up across a lot of different political philosophies, sort of broadly left, a collection of different ways of being left wing. And certainly, ideas were floating around and talk of rebellion and socialism and that kind of thing. She would have had a lot of influences from different directions.
Yes. And she also was very, like you were saying, she wrote a children's book, but she did a lot of writing. She was a poet.
She was so prolific, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess in Paris was the place to get all of these various influences and inspiration and but also, I guess, action.
Yes, and she ran her own school in Montmartre for the children of workers, and she ran it along her own lines. So she was very much, her education philosophy was to let children learn through play, which was the antithesis of French thinking about education, and has been for a long time. They thought learning by rote was the way to go, and they couldn't really understand why she had animals in the classroom and why she allowed children with special needs to be educated alongside everyone else. They were quite
very radical.
Quite radical ideas.
Yeah, for that time. I mean, we are talking maybe latter part of 19th century, but even so, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think she was, and she was very self-confident about her ideas, and she had a lot of success. Her children absolutely adored her, and I think she gave a lot, and she was given a lot of approval back. She was very popular, and she also did a lot of work on local committees
and in France she is very well known as a person, isn't she? And in Paris she's very sort of well signed for, if I understand it rightly.
Yes, streets and schools and squares named after her. She's a well-known figure, but she's scarcely remembered here.
But that is not for her sort of contribution in education, is it? It's for something different.
She is largely known, I suppose, in France for her actions during the Paris Commune and her life after that. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know very little about the Paris Commune.
Well, yes, I can skate through it quickly. A little tour of it.
Yeah.
I think we start with the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, which the Emperor Napoleon III, who we've just mentioned, he was more or less manipulated into it by Otto von Bismarck, who saw it as part of his grand scheme to create this war, and out of it he was going to build the German unification. So he provokes Napoleon into declaring war on Germany, on Prussia, essentially. Prussia invades. They have some battles which France loses badly. And at the time, France was expected to win, but they made a number of poor decisions, and they lost at the Battle of Sedan. And really, essentially, it was all over, and Prussians encircled Paris.
Yeah.
Then you get the Paris siege, which was a time of terrible suffering for the people of Paris.
Yeah.
Because they thought this siege would only last, say, a couple of months, and in fact it lasted 5 months, and people started dying of starvation at the end. So after 5 months, the French government gave in to the Prussians. And this made the people of Paris, particularly the working class districts who had really, really suffered and also given so much. They had collected money for cannon and this and that. So they felt that they'd sacrificed so much, all for nothing. They'd been betrayed by the government. And so talk started of a commune. But it waited. It wasn't until there was a sort of a pinch point, a conflagration, that things really started moving. And Louise Michel was right in the middle of it.
Okay. So what was there a sort of crunch point at some point?
Yes, I mean, it was on her doorstep in Montmartre one morning. And the 18th of March, in fact, 1871, Montmartre had custody of these cannon, and the government sent soldiers to seize them. The people of Montmartre and other working class districts, they thought that the government could potentially use these weapons against them. And also they felt they had paid for them, so why should they be in the control of the government? So these soldiers were seen on the hill taking these cannon away. The alarm was raised by women leaving the house early in the morning to get bread. They saw this happen, and then, yes, the church bells in the district started ringing, and Louise Michel got up and put on her uniform of the National Guard, took up her rifle. She was very unusual in that she was a woman who was armed and in the National Guard. And so she was on that hill, trying to stop these cannon being seized with a lot of other people. And they started talking to the soldiers who were seizing them. And it was, they talked. So there was a conversation. So it wasn't a violent, though somebody was shot, but it wasn't a terribly violent situation.
No.
Until the afternoon, when things got very hot and a couple of generals were shot. And really after that, the government ordered its whole administration to leave Paris and operate from Versailles. And that a few days later, the Commune was declared.
I see. Okay. And then the Commune was there for a long while, or how did it?
No, only a matter of weeks, 10 weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about 10 weeks. It was very short-lived. They hastily
But they achieved a few things.
They achieved a lot, but it wasn't sustained after the Commune fell. They did some interesting things. They banned capital punishment, and they forgave rents. During the siege, there was a sort of rent amnesty, and that was about to end. But they restored that. They stopped child labor. They did various things to help the quality of life of the working class.
Very progressive. And was this, well, obviously, I guess Marxism wasn't happening yet.
No.
So this was some sort of socialist ideal.
Well, they were not united in their political philosophies, as I understand it. There were lots of people who thought one thing, another group of people think another thing. It was all broadly left. And, the government was, I think it was a third working class, working people, and the other 2/3 were, I would say, sort of middle class bourgeois. They were called friends of the people. So you got lawyers and journalists and people like that. But they hardly really had time to erect all their sort of the administrative structures and get going before it all ended.
Yes, and how did it end?
Well, they were cut off, just like it's often called the second siege of Paris. But what happened is really they didn't have enough of strength to keep the government troops out, and they were not really defending themselves efficiently, and the government troops more or less walked in through one of the gates and took over, then spread through the city and took over. They had their eye off the ball, unfortunately. But I don't think they could ever have won, really, because the rest of France, there were sporadic sort of rebellions in support of the Commune, but the rest of France wasn't going with them.
What happened to Louise?
Well, she fought on the barricades, and she was commanding men, again, highly unusual. And she eventually was left for dead in a trench. She was wounded, and she managed to get up, and she went home, and she found that her mother, who she absolutely adored, her mother had been taken hostage. So that was for her a no-brainer. She went off to the police station and handed herself in, and she was arrested and sent to prison.
Oh, okay. Terrible.
Terrible. And one of the most terrible things about it was the journey from Paris to the prison, which was in Versailles, women's prison. Many more men were arrested and sent to prison than women. The women were a distinct minority, but they seem to have attracted a great deal of hatred and disapproval by the authorities. They were seen as much worse, partly because women were blamed for the massive fires in Paris at the end of the Commune. And really, I suppose, she's lucky that she survived, because so many didn't. There was terrible bloodshed in the streets, bodies piled up. But she went to prison, and eventually she was tried and sentenced to hard labor in New Caledonia, which is in Polynesia.
Because that was French in those days, I guess.
Yeah, that was part of the empire, the French Empire.
Yeah. And what happened to her there? Was it hard labor? And
it was hard labor. She continued to be quite rebellious, and she got involved with the local population, the Kanaka, and they were not happy under French rule, so I think she gave them a bit of support. I'm not quite sure how she did that, but she was certainly involved in it. And
amazing.
That was supposed to be for life.
Yeah. Oh, I see. To be there.
Yeah. She admitted all the crimes that she was charged with and asked for the death penalty in court.
But she got deported instead.
Yeah, because they didn't want to make a martyr.
Cause trouble where she.
Yeah.
That's good for her. She sounds amazing.
I think the force of her personality is quite astonishing. But she was also, she was also a very considered person, and
Mm.
you know, she given to writing poetry and novels and a lot of stuff. She was very prolific.
But I was thinking now when she is in Polynesia, she's getting very close to 50, I think, because she was, you
Yeah,
know, this
she
is
she came back in 1880, so she was 50 then.
yeah,
She came back
came back
because the
to
government,
France.
yeah, she came back to France because the government had an amnesty. It was slightly less right-wing government, Republican government now, because Napoleon had been given his marching orders when he lost the war.
Yeah.
So they declared the Third Republic, and by 1880, the government was keen to forget everything about the Commune. So
Yeah.
what they wanted is for people to come back, and there was a media blackout really on the Commune, and people were pardoned. So the exiles in London came back, and the banished, like Louise Michel in Polynesia, they were allowed to come back too.
Okay, and was she then behaving and didn't cause any trouble when she get back to Paris and became a model citizen?
Well, she never failed to cause trouble to the French government, and she was always under surveillance. So she just continued on the things that she felt were important.
Yes.
And by 1883, she was involved in setting up a shelter for exiles, so people who stayed on in London, and exiled anarchists from all over Europe. She was.
Can I ask you
Sure.
then, was she an anarchist at
She
this
was.
point?
She didn't say she was an anarchist during the Commune, but she did say that later.
Mm.
So she, in 1886, she was arrested on a march, and that was, I think it was 1886. That was when a black flag was carried for the first time. That sort of association between black flag and anarchism was made. So and she was arrested on that march and imprisoned.
Oh, again.
Again, yes. And she was sentenced to six years, but she only did 3.
Okay.
But in 1883, she made a sort of a week-long visit to London. And
are we now coming to Lambeth?
we are, yes. So she was in London. She was trying to set up this shelter, for which you could read, hostel perhaps, for exiled anarchists and political people who are broadly on the left. And so while she was here in London, she came down to Lambeth to see how the workhouse was run, because that is a place that housed people who were in need. And I think she wanted to see what was happening anyway, and how Britain treated its poor, and also how a big institution like that would work and how it would provide care.
Yes, I see.
So she was sorry.
Was she impressed by what she saw here?
Well, she was and she wasn't. Frances Lord, who was on the board of Guardians, was she felt, from what Louise Michel said, she felt that she'd got a big tick, well done. And Louise Michel afterwards saying, well, it wasn't quite that simple. And but she was, she took note of the fact that Britain, it was written into law that the poor were to be taken care of in some way. In France, there was no safety net whatsoever. You could throw yourself on the charity of the church,
Yeah.
Or if you had no money at all, you could be rounded up and sent to a sort of work factory to do hard labor and earn your keep. I mean, there are some similarities to a workhouse, but it was apparently so bad in there that people would do almost anything not to be sent to a French institution like that.
Yeah. So a mixed bag, but she did fall in love a bit with London, though, didn't she?
She loved London, and she certainly was impressed with some of the things that she saw in Lambeth. She went down to the Old Vic to see what was happening there. And there was Emma Cons presenting education for the working classes, and she walked around the corner to Emma Cons' sort of social housing that she set up, and she was seeing how working people were being housed and in decent conditions. So she was impressed with that. And Lambeth Workhouse, you could see that it was very well run, and it was, it had compassion in its attitude, but it was still quite an oppressive institution.
Yeah, well, I find it, as a Lambeth person, I find it fascinating to think that Emma Cons and Louise Michel met, and here are these two women who are actually making a profound difference for working people, meeting and sort of talking ideas, I guess.
Yes.
And I wonder how they communicated. If Emma Cons spoke French, or I guess Louise Michel spoke English, or
she did speak English. I think her English improved as the years went by, and certainly when she later came to live in South London, it got a lot better.
Yeah.
She delivered while she was here for that week in 1883. She delivered lectures, but they were in French. Frances Lord, who was accompanying Louise Michel, she may have spoken French and done a bit of translation, is the way I think it probably happened.
Yeah. Emma Cons, I think, is interesting as well, in that she also came from quite humble background.
Yes, she came from a working family, didn't she? And she more or less educated herself.
Yes. But I think that for that gender, there is, in this period in time, quite formidable women who are doing extremely good social, doing very hard work socially for women's rights, or for just social justice, like Emma Cons, and it seems as well Louise Michel. And
yes,
education, how important that is in order to lift people up.
I think is crucial, really. And no wonder Louise Michel felt so strongly about it, because the situation in France for women was so bad with education. And one of the things about the Commune was that it freed education from its tie to the Catholic Church.
Yes.
But of course that was very short-lived.
But then what surprises me is that I've heard that she was sort of not fighting for women's suffrage, and that to me seems strange, when she was so passionate for equality and social justice. Do you have any explanation on that?
I would say that at that time in France, that it wasn't seen as a priority. There was so much work to do in terms of social justice generally, just getting people fed and getting wages into a place that was, to make a living wage. There was so much to do, that my understanding is that she felt it was something that would come with revolution, proper big revolution.
Yeah.
But it just, but it would have to wait. they had to do other things first. It's not that she was opposed to it.
No.
It was just that the tasks ahead were so enormous that it wasn't at the top of the list of priorities.
I see.
Well,
Well, I mean,
it is weird to us now, as women, to look back and think that.
But I guess if you can't feed your children,
exactly, yeah,
your priority, you rather get some bread than go feed your children with a vote, can you? But I mean, she seems amazing. She seems like such an amazing woman with so many aspects. And I think, this sort of idea of her wearing a uniform and rushing up the hill in her 40s to fight, and then her love for her mother and for the kids that she was teaching. And I believe she liked animals as well. Is that right?
She was a great animal lover. And even on the trip home from New Caledonia, she managed to smuggle 5 cats aboard. And in fact, that boat stopped at London very briefly, and she had a quick meeting with some of her political allies and old friends really living in London, and she made them take the 5 cats. But she, when she was when she was teaching,
know why she came back.
When she was teaching, she had animals in the classroom. She had the snake and I can't remember exactly what, but so she taught the children kindness and compassion through caring for animals, which I think is, it's before its time in a way. She was a very compassionate person.
Yeah.
And she was also a fantastic networker. So she would talk to anyone who invited her, say, she was invited to go to see the workhouse at Lambeth. Off she went. She wasn't fussed about the political affiliations of anyone that she talked to, and she would be prepared to do more or less anything if it advanced her cause, which was really social justice and education for women. In the end, that's what it boiled down to.
It's we have nowhere in London, do we, where we commemorate her?
No, I don't think so. She, as we said at the beginning, she was she's not remembered very well here. It's a shame. And her bicentenary is coming up in 2030. So it would be nice to think that somebody could organise perhaps a plaque or something, or perhaps on one of the houses where she lived in South London. But also there's no recent biography in English of her. It strikes me that 2030 might be a time when someone could really take a look at her life and assess it and bring her to the attention of the public.
People will look at her life, in different ways, because different eras have different preoccupations, don't we? And I think it would be interesting to find out more about her from the perspective that we have, maybe 2030, or in now, so to speak. So I guess quite a lot of it is a bit old, maybe.
Yes, I think she's ripe for a reassessment. Really, it would be great if someone would do that.
Well, thank you so much,
Well,
Naomi,
thank you
for teaching me a little bit about her, and I think it's fantastic that she actually was here in London.
She lived in London for at least about 10 years on and off. She would go back and visit France, and she lived to a ripe old age. She was 75, which for the time was really quite elderly. But
sadly, she didn't experience any revolution, I guess.
Not after the Commune, but she did know about the revolution in Russia in 1905. And
Oh,
she
yeah.
apparently got out of her sick bed and danced around the room.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Door podcast. Please like us on social media, Twitter or Instagram at The Door podcast, or
subscribe to us. You'll find all our various platforms on our website, thedoorpodcast.com.